The honeymoon phase is interesting regardless of what product you just bought. Maybe it's that new car smell or the experience of making your new apartment look just right. With smartphones, the experience is usually very similar, unless you woke up at midnight on February 14th and were fast enough to order the new kid in town. This is the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip, Samsung's second bet on a foldable future and what the company dubs as a new spin into how a smartphone is designed. I know many of you see this and think nostalgia, remembering that cell phone you used back in the late 90s and early 2000s. But back then, that design made sense. Having a clamshell cell phone was far better than using the large cell phone tanks of the time. So the biggest question is if having a clamshell smartphone makes sense in 2020. I'm Jaime Rivera with Pocket Now, and these have been my first impressions with the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip after 24 hours. It's hard to deny that Samsung made a bold statement at their Galaxy Unpacked. I mean, they start the show with the Galaxy Z Flip. Then they announce specifications that make this far better than your typical mid-ranger. Then they price it slightly lower than the Moto Razr, and then they launch it earlier than the Razr if you consider the fact that Motorola is still dealing with tons of shipping issues, up to the point where my unit still doesn't even have a status of shipment. If only Samsung would have provided enough units. I mean, certain Best Buy stores only had like 2 or 3 units, so of course this phone was going to sell out in minutes. Thing about it is, for those of you that are still waiting to get your phone, let me give you a rundown of what you're getting. The unboxing experience is kind of weird because, well, Samsung doesn't go all out as with the Fold or even the Galaxy Note 10. The box has a taller design with the Z on the cover and Flip under it. And below it we have some literature that tells us how the future changes shape, all while we have the device below with lots of care instructions and the protective sticker. I'm sadly going to owe you the whole ASMR experience of removing the plastic because coffee shops are notorious for copyright music. But special thanks to Michael Fisher for doing the honors while I held the camera. Make sure you follow the Mr. Mobile on YouTube. Now, the contents are really what makes this phone feel cheap. We have the old fast-charging brick here, since I don't think the Z Flip is capable of more wattage, which also means you have a USB-A to USB-C cable along with the usual adapter. And if you thought that for those $1,380 you'd at least get a pair of old Galaxy Buds, think again. Regular wires to USB-C, sadly, even if these buds are actually tuned by AKG and sound very well. Now keep an eye for the top cover, as the phone's case is actually hidden in there with some literature. I'll come back to how using this case feels like very soon. As the coffee expedition continued, we also went through the typical initial setup, which really hasn't changed much. You start with the usual Bixby talk you'd wish you could switch off, accepting the terms of service that no human or even lawyers have ever read, and then the Wi-Fi settings. The phone checks for updates, and if you choose to restore from an old phone, it immediately goes into Smart Switch if you confirm that you have the phone at hand, and if not, to Google's Restore if you don't. I love this. Michael restored from his old Galaxy Fold, and I restored from my Galaxy Note 10 Plus in no time. I actually had the impression that the process was far slower wireless than wired, but nope, it's actually really quick. Now, an interesting thing is that once the restore is done, you're once again greeted with all the same warnings in the sticker, right before landing into the home screen. And remember that one of the cool things about using Smart Switch is that if you're restoring from a Galaxy, all your folders and applications are placed just where you left them. I think the best way to describe my initial impressions of using the Z Flip is that it feels like if Samsung decided to relaunch their S10e as a foldable, and this is both good and bad. I mean, sure, the S10e was one of the most beloved Galaxies of last year, but at the same time it was the one that had the least amount of features. While extended, it literally looks like a taller S10e with the rounded borders for the flat screen and the rounded curves at the back. You even have the same side-mounted power button that doubles as a fingerprint scanner, and that you can use for gestures to call on notifications. This is really handy given the tall form factor, but that's so long as you're right-handed, and also sensitivity is actually kind of intense. Now obviously, the fact that this phone folds only takes the concept of this device being compact to a whole new level. And sure, the thickness when closed brings in a more noticeable bump in your pocket, but it does feel slightly better than using, say, a Galaxy Note 10 in your pocket. One thing I will recommend is to either grab the optional leather case that Samsung sells or use this phone without one. I mean, the case in the box is just bad. It only intensifies the amount of lint this phone picks up, which actually happens in minutes. The mirror finish on either color makes this quite the fingerprint magnet, and the case only makes the experience worse. Now, another thing to consider is that back in the day, one of the most important and coolest conveniences of having a flip phone was to be able to easily open it and interact with it. But with the Galaxy Z Flip, that's not the case. Samsung intentionally built this hinge to be sturdy and with additional stops for you to be able to set this phone on a table and interact with applications like the camera, but then that means that you need to flip this phone really hard for it to open, and that only makes me worry about throwing this phone to the side accidentally. And also, that flipping hasn't proven to be in this device's convenience if you read the instructions that come in the box. See, it doesn't recommend that you press your fingers to it, and yet you need to use your fingers and even your fingernails and gesture to push the screen open. Otherwise, this becomes a two-handed process that totally defeats the purpose of using this over a flat slab. Now, the good thing is that this is not like the times of the Galaxy Fold. If you think of it, this is pretty much the best display on a foldable, as you're not dealing with plastic anymore. This is actually glass. Now, Samsung hasn't really provided any details as to any sort of rating for this glass, or how was this possible, but I'm not gonna lie, I have the satisfying feeling of typing on it. It actually feels really good, even though, yes, there is a crease. You will have to deal with that. This is a 6.7-inch Full HD Plus dynamic AMOLED at 21.9:9 aspect ratio that has a few pros and cons. I mean, it's quite vibrant in direct sunlight and colors are fantastic. And obviously, yes, it does fold, but the content consumption experience is not my favorite. For starters, viewing angles aren't really its best feature, which only get worse depending on the sunglasses that you use in direct sunlight. And then there's the case where there are no stereo speakers and no headphone jack. The speaker is loud so long as you don't cover it. A lot of the elements remain the same, so the company's not really cheaping out. And I do find my initial test with phone calls to be very loud and crisp. And then the internals are a blend of flagship specs of 2019 and a few things that date even prior. I mean, the processor, RAM, and battery size are standards from last year. The storage size and speed are from this year. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and network are also older standards, and the fact that this phone is not water resistant are all things to consider. Thing is, in its defense, if I were to compare its specifications to other current foldables, you also can't deny that this is probably the most powerful device of its form factor at the moment. I mean, you can totally tell in the way this phone handles its version of One UI 2, which is based on Android 10. It is not significantly faster than a Galaxy S10, but if you consider the fact that it shares specifications almost to the dot, it's kind of surprising that this phone handles the whole user interface very fluidly. Samsung has also made some UI updates in order to improve your experience multitasking, which to a certain degree come from the Galaxy Fold, like the shortcuts from the side for a quicker multi-window, and there's also a new flex mode that allows you to place the phone on a table and take selfies, standard photos, or do video calls. Thing is, that sadly is about it. There's kind of no other functionality here aside from Samsung's native applications. And absolutely everything else, what you already know from One UI 2 is what you're going to see here. And if you were expecting to do a lot of interaction with the outer display, you're going to have to make peace with the fact that there's really not much you can do with a 1-inch display. I mean, sure, you can raise the phone to get the time, and then you can swipe to see the icons of your notifications, but absolutely every single thing afterwards will require you to open the phone to interact with it. Now, I have a feeling that Samsung decided to sacrifice this functionality in order to provide a larger battery. And I'll tell you this much, I mean, it's only been 24 hours, I need more time to test the phone, but so far, I mean, I've been able to get good enough battery life, which is kind of surprising. Now, the other way to say that this phone is so Galaxy S10e is because of its cameras. Like the S10e, there are only two cameras here, a standard and an ultra-wide, and you also have a punch-hole selfie camera inside. Looks can be deceiving though, as specifications mimic more the Galaxy S20 than last year's S10e. As a result, photos are what I'd call very Galaxy. I mean, Samsung has done a good job at toning down its saturation and delivering some very warm and colorful results that are not too oversaturated as before. You also have the versatility of an ultra-wide, but distortion is actually not very pleasing, even if you do activate the mode to correct that. Live focus portraits remain very good, and with the versatility of allowing you to switch to different effects or completely off. And the night photography that I took rendered some really good results for the most part. I mean, the mode does work with the ultra-wide, but the results were not as good as with the primary. Now, given the form factor, you can use this primary camera to take selfies, which is a plus, but that said, that internal selfie camera is not bad for the most part. I tried it a few times in that flex mode, which I find genius, and again, in very Galaxy fashion, skin tones are slightly beautified, which I know is the thing for some people. Thing about it is, look at this video stabilization. Alright, I am totally in shock. See, this is from that punch hole camera, which is now capable of recording 4K video at 60 frames per second, and even the color is not blown out in the bright sunlight that I tested it. I'm very impressed. I mean, stabilization is even better here than on the primary camera, which is not to say that it's bad, but I mean, sadly, if you want to go 4K, you do have to switch off the super steady video, though you also get the benefit of switching focal lengths. I seriously can't believe how much better this camera is at video than compared to the S10 Plus, but I will need more time to test this phone to reassure you of that. I think the best way to describe my initial impressions of using the Galaxy Z Flip after 24 hours is that this is a pleasant surprise. Some people don't like the design, I actually do, but this phone nails some of my most important pet peeves with other foldables. The fact that now we have glass on this display, the fact that now we have very decent specifications, that the price tag is not entirely crazy, and if anything, the only thing that I wish that I had here was water resistance, because the experience of using this phone is actually not bad at all. Thing is, the value proposition of foldables is very tough to justify today, and it's mainly because back in the day, paying more money for a clamshell cell phone made a lot of sense when compared to every other tank cell phone that was in the market back at that time. As of today, the biggest problem is that, well, foldables are sadly very expensive, and you have the problem that unless you're getting a tablet that folds into a cell phone, having a clamshell is not necessarily a far better experience than to have a regular cell phone in your pocket. So I guess the biggest question is, does it make sense to buy this phone or not? And this is what we're going to try to answer in our full review that's coming very soon. While that happens, let us know in the comments down below what you would like for us to test, or what phone would you like us to compare this to. And while you're at it, also follow us on social media, subscribe to our channel for more videos like this one. Also follow me on my personal handles to see me play around with this phone in the real world. Please give this video a thumbs up if you like what you saw. I'm Jaime Rivera. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you on the next one.